So welcome to Integrated Resources Institute informational interview program about jobs. Today we're talking with Drew Ysais, who has extensive experience as a post-production associate producer working on TV shows. He's worked on them for the last several decades. And we have a lot of people on the line, and we welcome your questions. You can let us know that you have a question in one of three ways. First of all, if you know where your mute button is, you can unmute yourself and then just politely say, excuse me, I have a question. And, and then we will anxiously wait to hear what you have to say. Another way is you can just indicate any one of the reactions, and then we will take that as a clue that you have something you would like to say. If you want to find either of those buttons, they're at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And if you're on a computer or a phone, they might be in slightly different locations, but they're basically at the bottom of your screen. The other thing you can do if you're up for it is to chat the question. Saud is going to be closely monitoring the chat, and she will interject with your question on your behalf when the timing is right. So now we are ready to get started. I'm going to be sharing some screens. So it's going to take a moment to, whoops, hold on. I have to share. This is the, there we go. Okay, so what I'd like to introduce you to Drew Ysais, and this is the screenshot from one of the shows that he had most recently worked on, and he gets the credit as an associate producer. So we're going to start by asking him some basic questions, and let's see, will he show up, Swad, when it's, oh, you're on.
Good call. So there's a way that we can, everybody in this meeting could focus in on him by clicking his screen when he chats. And there's also on the top section, there's a speaker view. So you can also have it where your view pops up, the person that's speaking only during, so I don't know, it's on the top right-hand corner called speaker view. And so when Drew starts chatting, their screen pops up with Drew's face.
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah. So just, go to, at the top right, go to view, and then a little list will pop down, and then you'll see speaker view. Click that if it's not already clicked, and then we'll see whoever is currently talking, which will mostly be Drew. So Drew, let's start by asking you what a TV show producer does.
So what a TV show executive producer does, in TV world, he is a head writer generally, and he writes most of the scripts and oversees the general direction of the show. For example, on Hawaii Five-0, for example, there was a head writer, and he would have a final say on everything pertaining to that show, as him being the executive producer. There are also other producers that are also writers and co-executive producers who work on the set and help see the day-to-day business of the set. For example, they want to make sure they're getting all the shots done. You want to go to the call sheet, screen number, what is it?
Yeah, I've got it. So okay. I just gotta share it. And okay, and that's call sheet. All right.
So this is a typical call sheet, and what it tells everybody, it says what scenes we're going to shoot. If you look on the very left-hand side in that not quite uppermost box where it says where it says pre-call rehearsal, it lists all the scenes on the left, what are going to be shot that day, the brief description of the scene, who is involved in the scene, and some notes on the very right. And if you want to see who is who in terms of the numbers of the cast, there's a list below that explains who is number one. For example, number one in this particular show is Tay Leone, and her character is Elizabeth. And that's what the producers, part of what they do, they make sure that all the scenes get shot during that day. And if overtime is needed to finish out that day, they approve the extra cost because it costs literally tens of thousands of dollars to run a set all day long. When you start looking at overtime, that costs even more money. All right. Next question.
I have a question, actually. This is
Oh, yeah.
intriguing. That sheet that we were looking at, who develops it?
So there is a person called the production coordinator, and it's their responsibility to, they work with the assistant director, and they get together. The assistant director gives them the screen, the shot, the scenes are going to shoot during the day. So then the production coordinator types all this into a form. This is basically a form. And every day it's a little different. But the assistant director and the director decide on what scenes are going to shoot that day per their location. So when they're at a particular location, they try and shoot all the scenes in that location on that day. So they don't have to go back and forth, right? Because you start moving the crew one day to one location, then back, that's just a waste of time that costs money to do so.
Mm-hmm.
So they shoot all the scenes for that episode in that location on that day. And that's why it's broken down that way. That makes sense?
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. So how is being a TV producer different than being a movie producer?
TV and movie producers know all the basics and all the groundwork for the fundamentals of making films. The main difference between a TV producer and a movie producer is that, sure, there are some that do the same exact things, but movie producers also can get a producer credit by bringing money into the project, so they have money to use for the production, or sometimes they get a producer credit if they bring a talent. Say they bring in Clint Eastwood or Denzel Washington. If they have a connection to Denzel Washington, they could get him interested in the project. He'll get a producer credit.
Mm-hmm. All right. So did you want to give us a brief overview of the images?
Yeah, let's start with a brief overview of how the whole film process works. And it's going to be brief. I'm not going to get too detailed because I could go on for hours, but this will be a brief detail of what happens. So go to image 9375, please.
Right. And that is, let's see.
The title page of the script.
Oh, there it is. Thank you. Great.
So it all starts out with the script, right? So this is the title page for this particular script of Madam Secretary, right? So everything gets based off this. And then we all get together and have meetings, and we talk about what happens in each scene. And then once we talk about it, the actors will have a read through, and they'll do what's called obviously a read through. So they have an idea of what the script is about, and if they have any questions, they get ironed out during that read through session. All right, and then what happens from there, it goes to production. Can you go to image 504?
Yeah.
So this is a typical movie set. And they're actually shooting at this particular moment. You see the guy in the lower left with the little monitor? He's probably the director looking at the scene as it's being shot. In the middle there, that is where they're actually shooting the scene. The camera is pointed towards the actors. If you look on the right, that guy sitting at that little control panel, that is the sound man, and he's listening for the dialogue to make sure you can hear it cleanly and to make sure there's nobody moving or there's no airplanes flying overhead or a car driving by, because we want to have the audio, the dialogue as clean as possible, right? So that's what's going on in a typical set. The director calls action, they hit the clapper. Can you go to the scene of the image of the clapper? I think that's 037.
437. Oh, 037. Yeah.
Yeah, 037, so yeah.
I had a quick question before you move away from the screen. I
Sure.
thought this was a real house, but then I'm looking at the ceiling. This isn't a real house. This is a
No,
stage, right?
this is a stage, right? So they'll make it look identical to a house in every way, shape, and form, because we want to give the illusion of this is a real house. And a lot of times they'll shoot exterior scenes at a real house, right? And so then we go into the interior, we control the sound, the lighting, the weather, all that stuff inside, right? So that's why they make sets. So we have more control over what can happen in the picture and sound. Make sense? Very good. Let's go to the next shot, 037. So this is a clapper. When the director calls action, the camera guy says speed, and the AD says roll sound. The clap, see how the little clapper is open? The little clapper gets shut, and that's how we sync the sound up for post-production. Now on this clapper, there's valuable information. If you look on the very left-hand side, it tells you what camera roll they're shooting. So that tells us where this shot lives. Then it gets broken down into by scene, scene 5, and by take, take 2. And that big digital number in the middle, that is the time code that gets shared with the sound, so everything is in sync. Because if anything is out of sync, we have a problem in post-production. You'll have lips that are moving out of sync from another, right? And so that is a typical clapper, and that's all the functions that does, and that's controlled by the camera department. All right. Then it goes to post-production. And if you go to shot 882, please.
Mm-hmm. And that's
the moviola.
Yeah, that's this one. Yes.
That one, yes. So that is how we used to edit film. So back in the day, right when I was first started, now I'm kind of a dinosaur these days, but when I started, we had all these editors had these things called moviolas, and we would run physical film through it and sound. You see that little round speaker in the middle? That's a sound head. So they run sound, what's called sound mag through it, and actual film through the negative, and we would physically cut the film and splice it together with what's called a butt splicer. And it was a very painstaking, long, arduous process, but that is how we used to edit back in older times. Now, when I say maybe not even that long ago, I mean, we were still using film until about the 90s. And then everything went digital. If you go to the next shot of the editor's timeline.
Let's see. Oh, for gravity?
Yeah.
Okay. Gravity timeline. Hold on 1 second. Let me go back to.
Drew, I have another question, or maybe a statement.
Sure.
I know my husband was in the film industry too, or majored in film, but I know that there's like a thing where people like to shoot in film because it's cool, or I don't know if that's a thing. But do people still? Go ahead.
Some people still use film, not very often, because it incurs a lot of extra cost and a lot of extra labor. But some people like the look of film because there is a certain look to film. It looks different than video that gets shot. And we can make the video look like film if they want a film look to it. That's a whole nother thing with visual effects. But we could certainly make film look like, or video look like film. What we're seeing here is now where everything is being shot digitally, so on computer cards. So instead of film, we shoot on a little computer card. Everything gets shot digitally, and it produces these images up top, and below is what you see, what a typical editor timeline looks like. So this is how he assembles everything. So he'll add one cut, and then he'll have another cut, and he'll splice it together, and that gets put on this timeline. And there could be literally thousands of cuts within a 1 hour show. right? And then when it gets to be very long, sometimes you have to make a second timeline because I think the timelines only hold about 1,000 shots before the memory. You have to go to the make another timeline for the next act or something. So it's a very long and arduous process. You can also see there's also sound on the bottom. There's 4 tracks of sound, so you can see the dialogue and the sound effects and the music that are all adding that together. So it helps make the final project, right? Then we ship it to our, once that's all done and all the picture is locked and all the directors given his notes, the producers have given their notes, the studio and the network have given their notes, they lock the picture. And what that means is that the final picture is finalized. So now it goes to sound. So if you go to, no, let's go to VFX. Let's go to the VFX shot. 3822, please.
Okay, hold on. And, okay.
So before we send it to sound, a lot of times in a lot of shows, we have what's called visual effects. So this shot right here was a shot I found from C-SPAN. And the gag was we want to have our own actor speak in the actual chamber of Congress. And all the people that you see in there are all real congressmen because they are eminent domain, right? So we had the right to use them. There were other people in the shot that were not cleared to use legally, so we had to erase them. And we can only see the people that we have permission to see. And then our little guy is standing up on the desk. You see the guy standing up on the right next to his desk? That is an actor. And we had him say a little speech. And how it was shot is shot as a plate. So he is shot in a sea of green. There's nothing but green surrounding him. So he's in his costume and he's wearing, what he's wearing, and he's sitting next to his desk. The whole scene is shot that way with him delivering his speech in that green screen environment. Now they're able to take that little plate and insert him into this stock shot I found, right? And we highlighted him a little tiny bit. We made him just a little tiny bit brighter than everybody else. So you're able to see his action because the scene is about him. And then we intercut close-ups with him where we didn't have to use visual effects, right? And that's what visual effects are. Then from there, that gets cut in, and then we ship everything once it's locked to our sound department. Our sound department, if you go to shot number 917, please.
Mm-hmm.
This is a typical sound stage. This is from Hawaii 5.0. So what happens is once it gets shipped to sound, and the sound editors have it for about a week, they do a voiceover, they add the sound effects, they add what's called Foley, like people walking on cement, so you can hear the people's steps actual walking. We do that in sync with what we see on film. Then all those little pieces get shipped to our soundstage, and they put all those sounds together. There's 2 guys sitting at a giant control board. This controls the sound effects, the music, and the dialogue, like what is being circled right there. And then we decide we want to hear more of this or less of this. Want to hear more music? You want to hear less music? Can you make that sound effect louder? And all the while, they have to make sure we hear the dialogue because that's obviously driving the story as well as the picture. So sound is very important as well as picture, right? And that's part of what I do. And then once that's all set, it all gets sent to our lab where it's been assembled already. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And we color it there and we title it. And then we make our final deliverables, which means that's all the material that goes to the network that you see on the air, right? So when you're watching a TV show, everybody's gone through the same process. And it's a pretty long and complicated, arduous process.
Mhm.
All right.
All right. So
And
do
then
you,
Drew, I had another quick question. That
Yes.
spot, the number that I highlighted, was that the same as the one on that? That's like the timing number on the bottom of that screen.
Right. So
Okay,
yeah. So
cool.
that gets sunk up with the sound. So we know the picture and sound are in sync. When they're out of sync, that's when we have a problem. We want them to. That's why we sync the camera and the sound together at the same time code, so it lines up perfectly.
Perfect. Thank you.
Make sense?
yeah. All right. So do you work on the show set or are you always behind the scenes?
Depends on the show. Most of the time I'm behind the scenes, but there are times where I get to go on set and direct what's called an insert shot. If you go to image 193.
Mm-hmm. Let me, yeah, and then I'll have to go back to here and hold on 1 second. This one's a little trickier. Okay.
There you go. So this is an insert. So what happens is they've shot the show. It's all done, but we wanted to make a scene a little more clear. Do you see the hand going into the key going into the little slot? Well, the director and the producer decided we needed that shot that production didn't shoot, so we had to go to a stage and film it so we could put it into the show, right? Because this is a major story point. And this is how inserts get shot. And usually inserts are small little scenes where you see like hands and little actions, like say even a murder weapon or a bloody knife or the smoking gun. Those are called inserts. And we had to shoot a special insert for this show to make this particular scene a little more clear for the audience. And that's part of what I do. Also, if they need to get some audio and we need an extra line that to make a scene more clear, I'll go to the set and I'll have the actor, I'll show them a little clip of the scene and I'll say, can you say off camera this particular line so the scene makes more sense? And they'll go, oh, okay, because they'll see how it's cut together and they need a line to make it make sense. Make sense to everybody? Anybody have any questions? It's a
No, I
lot
think
of
we're
steps. A lot of steps to making a film.
absolutely. So what do people on your post-production team do?
So I work with the editors and hold on, where are you? What? Where are you?
It's number 4. Oh, you're muted. Hold on. Huh.
I'm unmuted, sorry.
Okay.
The screen got switched. I need to see you to do this.
Okay.
So so where are we? Okay. What
What
do
do
my
you,
people on my team do? So I work with the editors and the producers and the directors and the studio and network. So what happens is what my team does, the editors get the film, the daily film, they assemble it as they're shooting. So we're always a day behind what's being shot. So once it's all together, we give the editor's cut to the director makes his notes, and then we show it to the producers. They make their notes. Then once we give their notes, we give that to the studio and network, and they give their notes. And then once that's all done, we lock picture. So everybody is important on our team. So the editor and the writers, we all work together to make sure we're all telling the same story. Because basically that first page I showed you at the very beginning of the script, that is basically our Bible. Everything gets shot off that Bible. So that if there's ever a question, we go back to the script because that is quote unquote our Bible. Make sense?
mm-hmm.
Okay.
So what do they mean when they say, we'll fix it in post?
Okay, go to go to image 1039, please.
1039. Okay, hold on. Let me find my mouse. Okay, there we go. And then we'll go back here. Okay, there you are.
There you go. Okay, so this fixing in post, this is in the assembly stage. So what you're seeing right there, that one half of the screen that isn't green is what was shot from the set and the lab has assembled. That we run what's called the split screen, and this is part of my job. We run a split screen, and if you go to scene 1040,
Mm-hmm.
this is what it looks like completed. So half of it is what the lab has done, and half of it is what the editor has done. So we run the picture simultaneously to make sure all the picture is assembled correctly and that the sound is in sync. So if it's not in sync, the picture where you saw that split will not line up perfectly. So it's up to me and the editor, the online editor, to look at the picture and make notes. Hey, this isn't in sync. We need to fix it. It's drifting a little bit. So we have to make sure it's completely in sync. So it's a pretty big responsibility to make sure everything gets assembled correctly. Because once this is done, this goes to our sound department and they base everything off this cut. So if I'm wrong, when I go to the stage, everything on the stage could be wrong. So this is a big deal that we make sure everything is in sync. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and Harold has a question.
Sure,
Oh,
Harold,
brilliant.
what's your question?
Harold, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hello, I don't hear the question.
All right, Harold, we're listening.
Harold, unmute yourself.
I'm just
There you go.
curious. Is it the same thing as The Walking Dead, like the producers, so they cut it off?
I'm sorry, what was the question? The
Walking
producer
Dead.
Yeah, what
The
about The
Walking
Walking
Dead.
Dead?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Do they do the same thing as
Yeah,
what
the
you
process
do?
is pretty similar for all scripted TV,
Mm-hmm.
basically. So
Mm-hmm.
Walking Dead is scripted, so they basically do the same process that I do, because it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
universal,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So if you look at what I do, I could apply this to basically any show. Just the script is different, right? So everything
Okay.
else, the process is the same. The
Mm-hmm.
script is different, right? So
Okay.
it gets
Yeah.
shot the same. The sound gets
Mm-hmm.
recorded the same. It's just the content that you see is different,
Mm-hmm.
right? All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Can you go to image 1323, please?
Yeah, speaking of The Walking Dead,
Yes, funny, good transition. So,
yeah,
see the guy sitting down on the left-hand side? And do you see the mirror in the back? Does anybody see anything weird about that? Well, you don't see his reflection, right? So is he a vampire? He isn't. This is a camera trick, and this is something I have to fix. If you notice the mirror is tilted out towards the camera. So the camera could look straight into the mirror and it won't be seen. So what I have to do to help fix it in post is I take a little picture of the guy sitting down and I inserted him into the mirror. So it looks like it's a complete image. There's a million little camera tricks that we do to make the camera unnoticeable. If I do ever see the camera, I have to have visual effects erase it out. Or if I do see like a water bottle, it shouldn't be there, like in Game of Thrones, to make sure that gets painted out as well. I'm the final eye, so if I see something like this, it's up to me to fix it. And a lot of that gets done by basically common sense, right? So good transition, good question, timely question to ask.
yes, exactly. So,
Um,
oh, was there another question?
I have one.
Oh, somebody has a
Uh,
question. Benjamin.
yeah, that's me. So I want to ask, um, since you're a TV a show producer, and you have been in some other films that you made in your film career, I want to ask, how long have you been a producer for 9 years? And the second question is, when do I get a phone a interview, like a phone interview, like a text, regular calls, text, and FaceTime?
Okay, so what I'm gathering is you want to find out about how to start working in the industry, right? And how long I've
Yeah,
been doing it. So I've
yeah.
been working in the industry since about, 1980 or so. Well, that's when I first
Ooh.
started. So
Yeah,
I've been around for a long time.
right.
So I've done a lot of TV, I've done film. And the best way to get started, I was lucky enough, this transitions to another question. Um,
We can go out of
the
order.
way, yeah, might as well. The way
Yeah.
I got started is that I was lucky enough, right after high school, a friend of mine was working on a project and he needed what's called a gopher, and I was the guy who I go for this and I go for that. So they called that job a gopher. So I was basically driving around town doing all the errands for the show. For example, I was working with transportation. They put me in a station wagon, and I would drive to the prop house and get certain props. And I had to make sure I picked up the right props. If it wasn't the right thing, I'd have to go right back, right? So I had to make sure that you had the exact right props. Or I had to go drop off the film at the lab, or I have to get something from the lab and bring it back. So I was doing a lot of that type of stuff when I first started going. So the best way to get started, I think, is to get some experience first. And you could get experience by getting in contact with your local college. A lot of students are making films, so you get some experience working on student films. Plus, you get experience by actually going to school. I went to school after there was a big strike in 1982. I worked for a few years and then there was nothing being done. So I said, well, I might as well get my degree now. So I went back to school. I went to Cal State Northridge, got my degree in film, and slowly worked my way into a career. And it wasn't easy for me to get started because I was doing features and I wasn't working all of the time. And since I wasn't working all the time, I had to have another job to help pay my bills. And that's how most people typically start, right?
Did
Yeah.
that answer your
Drew, are
question,
you
Ben?
saying,
Yeah, that's one of them. But I want to know, when do I get a interview, like a phone interview, like regular calls, text, and FaceTime?
Okay, so once you have a little experience, you have something to put on a resume, you would send that to like the studio or network or a job board. And a lot of times that gets filtered down to me. Not all the time, but a lot of times that gets filtered down to me. And then I would call you, say, hey, this guy's got good experience. Let's bring him in for an interview.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I need to know. Thanks.
Sure.
Now, Drew, I'm going to skip question number 6 and save it for later
Right.
because all the conversation right now has really been about getting started. And
Right.
really interesting story about your very early background getting started in the career. Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I got interested in film just kind of by accident in a way. I used to live very close to a studio here in Studio City, and one day I was riding by on my bike, and I saw a lot of people lined up, and I asked the security guard, "What are people lined up for?" And they said, "Hey, we're going to film the show Mary Tyler Moore." And I was like, "I love that show." And he says, "Would you like to be an audience member?" I said, "Yes, I would." So he let me in. I was an audience member. Um, then I realized they did this every single week. So every single week at that time, I would show up and the guard got to know me. So it got to be kind of funny because he would just see me and say, "Ah, come in." And so I formed a relationship with him, and he would let me come in and walk around a little bit. He says, "Don't bother anybody or say anything to anybody, because I don't want to get in trouble. But go around and take a look at and see what people do." And I was fascinated and hooked at that time. I said, "This is what I want to do." So I knew at a very early age that this, film business is what I wanted to do, because I thought it was very cool, saying all these people doing different jobs, they all had the same purpose, we're doing the same thing that we see on screen. Pretty interesting, I thought, and very cool. I got lucky.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got started when you were 12, so
I didn't start when I told. That's where I got interested.
that's when you got interested. All right. So when you did get started actually working in the job, did anything surprise you about doing the job?
Yeah, the amount of detail that was going on. Everything you see on set is planned. They don't like surprises on set, because if there's a surprise and something doesn't go right, it could cost them tens of thousands of dollars an hour to go back and fix that mistake. And obviously, most productions don't want to waste tens of thousands of dollars an hour fixing a mistake. They want to have everything ironed out before we shoot. So when we're shooting, everything's rehearsed and everything is ready to go. So we know exactly what's happening. So there's no mistakes and no questions what's happening that day of the shoot.
Right, right. Going
And
back
the amount of
to the
detail is just
image, right?
crazy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you need a certain amount of skill and skill level to be a post-production producer. Can you talk about the skills that are most needed to have this position?
Yeah, the
I
most
mean, what you've
important
talked
things
about.
the
Yeah.
most important things I think to have as an associate producer is a good eye,
Yeah.
patience, and deductive logic. So say if something isn't right, you have to look at it and say, and deduce it, hey, I don't think this is right. My common sense is telling me I should get this fixed, or have at least another pair of eyes on it so we can, get this problem fixed. And that's part of what I do. I see little things that aren't right on screen, and I say, hey, can we fix that? There's a shadow in the background that we don't want to see, like a boom shadow. Sometimes you'll see a boom hanging down, and I have to say, uh-oh, there's a boom. I have to eliminate that. So we
Mm,
either do a blow up or we erase it out if it's just standing static. So it's a lot. There's a lot of stuff you have to do, a lot of common sense. You have to have a good eye, and you
mm,
have to have a lot of patience, because
mm.
a lot of times, I mean, it takes time. I'll watch a certain cut of a show probably about 20 or 25 times before it airs. So by the end of it, when I'm QCing the final thing where I'm still seeing mistakes, um, I know all the dialogue for that scene for the entire episode. So I've seen it a
Right.
whole bunch of times. I've read the script. I've watched the dailies. I've seen the
Wow.
various cuts. So after a while, you get to know everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. So you've got some really interesting past work experiences. What would you say of those has helped you the most to get to where you are now? Or did you, learn the most by just doing things?
Well, like I said, I got lucky, and I got a job
Yeah.
early on when I was a kid, right out of high school, working as a gopher, and that really helped a lot. But I got a lot of experience working on student films, and then I was working on smaller, like, videos, like music videos. I got a lot of experience doing that. A friend of mine had a production company, and I was their production assistant, uh, helping do different things. I was assistant director on something. I was a camera guy on something. I did the electrical cables on something. So I know a little bit about everything. And not everybody has that same experience as I do. So I could
Right.
go onto a set and light a scene, or I could go on to an edit room and say, hey, why'd you make that cut? It looks matched. You don't want matched cuts because that looks redundant. We want to keep things looking fresh and exciting, right?
Right.
So that's
Right.
part of what I do. Just because I have a lot of the experience of doing all these different things.
Mm-hmm. And that capacity that you have to see all that detail, that's why they made you the boss. That's what I think. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's swing back around to the question that we skipped over. What are you doing now or have been doing most recently?
Well, right now, I'm not working due to the COVID uh,
Yeah.
pandemic, but I'll be working soon. There's some rumblings of stuff, projects coming up. I just finished Madam Secretary in December. So I was working on a pilot when the whole COVID epidemic started, and it's now been postponed. I don't know if that's even going to be produced. So I'm looking around for another job at the moment, but stuff is starting to happen. So I'll be working soon, I hope.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now that we have a lot of the basics of how you do your job and what is involved in the job, let's get down to some more of the interesting specifics. Give us an example of a show that is well produced.
Well, that's an interesting question because that's very subjective. For myself, a show that's well produced is where you can go from the script, have an interesting character, have an interesting story, have interesting camera moves, have interesting design, have the costumes be interesting, um, and all that work together in a cohesive fashion to get from point A to point B while telling a story. Because really, when you're working in film and TV, it's all about the story, right? So if
Yeah,
it's not, if anything's lacking in any of those departments, it makes a show, to myself, kind of boring. An example I think of a really great show was Breaking Bad. It was very original. They took a really weird subject matter and made it very interesting.
yeah.
And there's great performances. The cinematographer was great. They moved the camera around, which is really interesting to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was very well done.
Mm-hmm. I always remember that scene of the pants hanging out the window. That's how it would.
Right, exactly. Very original. I loved it. Very,
Such a visual.
yeah, such a great show.
That's
And
funny.
it's very fun too, because and in that you know what I do, what part of one of the things I do is I help research stock footage. So, and
Yeah.
stock footage is stuff that we don't shoot, which comes to an interesting story. I worked on a show called Hawaii Five-0 for a few years, and we
Mm-hmm.
did a Pearl Harbor episode.
Mm-hmm.
And there was I was looking, they told me 6 months in advance, start looking for footage now because we want to do this episode. It's going to be a big episode. And I said, I might as well start now. So every day I was looking for different, stock footage pieces I could use for the episode. And one day I happened to see a color shot of one of our battleships exploding. And I got some background information on it. And it wound up being a shot that was the only color shot of the USS Arizona exploding. And it just happened to be that day, there was a captain who had a brand new film camera and happened to be using it out when the attack happened. And he was across the bay from where the Arizona was. And he happened to be filming in color. And he got the explosion on film.
Mm.
Well, he went to go get it processed so he could take a look at it. The US government took it from him, and that they held it for 40 years. 40 years
Wow.
later, they gave the film back to the family. I don't
Wow.
think the guy who shot it ever saw the shot, but somebody posted it on YouTube, and that's where I saw it. I went, whoa, what is that? So I
Mm.
contacted the guy who posted it, and he knew the family who owned it. So I had to get permission from them to use that shot in Hawaii Five-0, and we actually used that shot in the episode because it had never been seen before. Nobody had ever seen it. It had just been released by the government just a few years beforehand. So it was
Right.
a pretty big stroke of luck, I thought.
Right. 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 Now, clearly you have a job where you have so many things to handle and your team is so important. So who do you rely on in your team and in throughout the production company? Who do you
Uh,
Your
Who do I rely on? I
Yeah.
rely on everybody. So I rely on the writers to make a good and interesting script. I rely on them to make everything perfectly clear. So if I have a question, I could go back to the script. I rely on the cameraman for shooting a nice, clean, pretty picture that we could make a nice image out of. I rely on the sound guy to get good audio so we can hear what's happening on the set. So we can actually hear the dialogue. I rely on our soundstage people to make a good sound mix, to make our shows sound a lot more interesting, right? I rely on my assistant who helps me keep all the logs of all the bills we have to pay for, because we have to pay for a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So my assistant tracks all that stuff, and I code everything, and he tracks it, and we pay all our bills that way. I rely on my post-production assistant to deliver everything on time, so we could get stuff to air. We literally deliver the show so they can, put it on the air.
Yeah.
So it's a very much a team effort.
I really have to go now.
Okay. Bye, Morgan.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So what do you do, Drew, when you're unsure about how to handle a problem?
When I'm unsure about a problem, the first thing I do, it depends on where I'm doing, right? So if I'm at the lab and I see something that's not right on screen, the first person I call is the editor, and the editor will say, "Hey, I meant the scene to play this way. Is it not playing that way for you?" And I'll look at it, and I'll look at it with my online editor, and we'll both say, "No, we could make a little fix here." And they'll say, "Okay, I'll make the fix, I'll send it to you." They'll send me the fix, and we'll fix it in the online bay. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry about that. So,
Who you rely on? Are you talking
oh
about?
yeah. So then, if there's another, if I rely on the sound guy to make good sound. I rely on our lab to make everything assembled correctly and to make our dubs clean, so when they air, there's no mistakes in it. I literally just last week got a call from International. There was a problem with the Madam Secretary where one little tiny frame froze for 1/24th of a second. And we had to fix it. And I've been off Madam Secretary for 6 months. So I had to get our lab to, reassemble that one scene for that one little frame. So yeah, even though I'm done with the show, I'm never really done with the show. So I rely on a lot of people for a lot of different things.
Right. Right. Now, as this is an informational interview and we're seeing from the questions that are showing up, a lot of people are getting really interested in this job. So when you're looking to hire someone, who's the perfect person? Now thinking about the folks here, and what schooling would they look to go for themselves?
So what I look for in a post-production candidate, I look for somebody who has a great attitude, somebody who's got a lot of patience, is a self-starter, who's computer literate, who doesn't mind working long hours, and has basically a really good attitude. I mean, for me, attitude is more important than experience. So I'd rather work with somebody I like and I could teach them what to look for and how to do their job, right? So while experience is important, I think attitude is more important than anything, right? Because I don't mind taking somebody who's very fresh and green and showing them the ropes and telling them this is how you do stuff, this is how you do things, right? This is how you protect yourself and us, and it's very simple to do. Just take these precautionary steps. For example, when I send our PA to get things at our lab, I always make sure I give them an exact detailed description of what I need. If the lab tries to give them something different, I say, please call or text me and let me know what they're going to give you. If it's not right, I need to know that, because that can mess something up down the line, right? So I'm reliant on them to have the, the fortitude to give me exactly what they're picking up and and let me know what's going on. So
Mhm.
to avoid any mistakes down the line. So if
Yeah,
something happens over here, it can affect something way down over here, right? So you
right.
have to make sure everything in between is working just right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So do you have, since you are going to be looking around for new opportunities, do you have a favorite kind of show that you're interested in working on?
Yeah, I like working on crime dramas myself because they're a lot of fun to work on. Usually
Yeah.
the shows are fun to read and then they're fun to watch being produced. Plus,
Yeah.
I'm responsible for a lot of the background things you see. So, like, say there's a TV playing in the background, it's up to me to find the stuff to put on that TV. Or there's some subtitles. I'm responsible for the subtitles that you see on the screen. So it makes my life very interesting. It
Yeah.
makes a lot of work, but it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We actually had a question in line with that from Courtney Hall. Courtney, did you want to ask your question?
It was actually in line with that one. It was, do you have a
Mm-hmm.
favorite TV show that you worked on?
That you
My
That you
favorite show
worked
that I've
on?
worked, yes, my favorite show that I just worked on so far has been Madam Secretary because it was um, it gave me a lot of responsibility. It was my first time being an associate producer. So I was very proud of that. And it was a very well-regarded show. It was had a good message, and everybody who worked on that show was very nice and very kind. It really was one of my best experiences I've had so far, working in this industry. I would love to work on that another show like that
Mhm.
if that ever happens again.
Yeah. How do you see the industry going moving forward? And your job
Well,
moving forward?
yeah. So what happens in my industry has been affected a lot by COVID. So I have a feeling that in the future, we may not be going to offices like we normally have. Normally, we're all together, the editors all together, the writers are all together, so we can all bounce ideas off each other. Now that's going to be done on a platform like this, like Zoom. So if there's a question, we would say, hey, excuse me, I have a question. Can we answer it through Zoom? So I'm feeling a lot of that's going to be taking place like what we're doing now.
Yeah.
Plus, we always have to keep on top of technology anyhow, because cameras are changing a lot, editing systems are changing a lot, TV monitors are changing a lot, and we have to be on top of all that stuff and ahead of the technology to implement our show for technical reasons, right? Because we need to deliver our show with certain technical specs, and that falls under my category to make sure the
Mhm.
show gets delivered correctly.
Yeah. So you'll be able to work from home considering all of that. I mean, I saw that table, there's a lot of heavy, big equipment that you're working with.
Yeah, for myself, since I'm not on the set, all I really need is a computer and a good monitor.
Oh,
So I'll be able to watch cuts and make comments on cuts. I might be zooming in with our online editor at our lab, and he could send me the split, and I could watch the split, and we could still do things via Zoom.
wow.
I have a feeling, I haven't done this yet, but I have a feeling that's the way it's going to go
Yeah.
for the next couple years, at least.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Drew. We have reached the end of our questions, and I wonder if anybody else has any lingering questions that you would like to ask Drew at this time.
We did have a comment by Dave Koenig. Did you want to just share that out loud about how you feel like you're an inspirational story?
Dave, you
I don't
got
know if he's
to
still on.
yourself?
Somebody thinks I'm an inspirational story?
No, no, he has.
No, he's an inspirational story. So
Oh,
I'm asking
okay.
him to unmute, but maybe that would be a way for him to ask you a question about, I asked to unmute Dave, but he needs to unmute himself. But he wrote it in the, there he is, he's unmuted.
Oh, great.
Hey, Dave.
Hello, Dave.
Okay, I'll be inspirational.
I'll just read to you what Dave shared. Dave
Okay.
shared that he's an inspirational story because he's one of the only kids in the world that has half of a heart that is still living.
Oh, wow.
And that he had died for 6 minutes and came back to life. And so how does, with him sharing that detail, if he has an inspirational story like that, how would he connect with sharing his story to producers or things like that?
Well, that's interesting. So he has a story idea. So I'm not in the writer guild, but he should, number one, register his story with the Writers Guild, or there's a way to do it so it's low cost and very easy. So if he has a story, he should write his story down, mail it to himself, and then mail it to the Writers Guild or a particular show, right? So when you mail that story to yourself and you leave that story unopened in the envelope, that is a form of copyright, right? So if somebody tries to use your idea, you have your story in a postmarked letter that is basically a copyright. So that protects you, that protects your story from anybody else borrowing that story, right? So that's probably the easiest way to get a story out there. And find a show that deals with that type of storyline, or find a network who might be interested, or find a producer who would want to produce that story. There are many avenues about going about it. That's probably the easiest way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like first protect yourself and then share it with others.
Exactly.
Right, but
And
it all
as a
starts.
filmmaker,
Yeah.
I die a little bit every time I make something, because like if something didn't go just right, I was like, oh, my heart's killing me. And I think a lot of the directors and producers feel the same way. Oh, my heart's killing me. But only figuratively, not literally.
Right. Right. Well, any
I
other?
had a question.
Here we go.
Just maybe a fun one, but like, who's the coolest actor you've worked with, or most famous actor?
I have a couple of pretty interesting stories about that. Thanks for asking that. So one of the very first things I ever did right out of high school, I worked on a big movie called The Winds of War, and there was a very famous actor named Robert Mitchum working on that show. So I got a job working in special effects, helping the special effects guy set things up. So I was up in Oxnard for like a week, and we were recreating Pearl Harbor. So Robert Mitchum, who was the big star of the show, saw me, I guess, a couple of nights later at this little tiny podunk bar up in Oxnard, because at the time there was nothing in Oxnard. There was literally nothing up there. There was just one little tiny bar. He saw me and noticed me from the set, and he said, hey, didn't I see you on the set? And I said, yeah, this is my first gig. And he goes, let me buy you a beer, let's talk. And so I had a beer with Robert Mitchum. It was actually a really great experience, super nice man. And he always comes across as a big, heavy bad guy, but he was just a big pussycat. Loved him, great guy. And then there was another little story. When I was looking for work after I graduated college, a friend of mine was working over at Clint Eastwood's production company called Malpaso Productions. So he said, come over, have lunch, and I'll see about spreading your resume around. I said, awesome. So I went there, we had lunch, and as I was leaving, I thanked my buddy, and I'm literally leaving the building. I turn a corner, and guess where I run into? Clint Eastwood himself. I went, whoa, hey, sorry, Mr. Eastwood. And he looked at me and gave me the squinty Clint Eastwood look and said, "Don't sweat it, punk." And I swear I almost lost it. That was like the funniest thing he could have ever done. So I tried not to laugh, but his assistant was sitting at the desk was just cracking up. So the second he left the room, I just started laughing and, oh my God, that's awesome. So those are basically like two coolest stories I have with like big actors. I work with actors all the time, but those are two of, I think, the coolest stories I have.
All right, all right. So Swat, I'm looking at the clock and we're dead on at about an hour. To keep us on time, shall we cut it now?
Yeah, I mean, did we want to, any last questions before we end the meeting?
There we go.
Drew, I wanted to comment. Thank you so much and bringing back a lot of memories. Our organization, we actually had an office at Universal Studios Hollywood in the mid 90s.
Oh, wow.
I remember meeting Arnold Schwarzenegger and I asked him for an autograph because my son was the excuse I used, but it was true, was, well, my son's really sick and he'd appreciate your autograph. He had a cigar in his mouth. He looked at me. He says, "Yeah, sure." And then he signed it.
That's awesome.
He was a spokesperson for, gosh, what are those all-terrain vehicles? Those real big ones that look like tanks.
Oh yeah, the Humvees.
Yes. But that was a cool story.
Yeah, that is a cool story. I've heard he's a nice man, actually.
Oh, yes. Yes. But Drew, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being a good audience. And thank you for the good questions. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully you got a little bit out of this, and hopefully we'll see you at the movies and the TV shows.
I see all the smiles on our clients. Thank you so much. Been a wonderful.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Everyone.
See you at the next All About Jobs session.